quite some intro music.
Yeah, I put that together just for the sake of these conversations, actually. Yeah. So, Tracey, do you want to introduce yourself and what you do? Because I will hold my hand up and admit that I understand that you're a physiotherapist. And we both did the coaching training together. And you're also an author, aren't you? So do you want to just give us a summary of what it is you do?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Tracey Kisson. I'm 55 years young. I'm a chartered physiotherapist, and I guess my speciality, or the thing that I'm passionate about, is trauma, emotional trauma, and how that becomes physical pain. I think
Cool.
I'm kind of ready to throw out some of the old ways of looking at pain, and yeah, it's that. And I run my own business, and last year I was invited to write a chapter in a book, and so I wrote about how science can be spiritual, or spiritual teachings are also scientific, and I just love that blend, really.
Nice. So okay, there's a few things there that I'm really interested in. Like you mentioned, how emotional trauma can become physical pain. I'd really love to dive into that with you, because that was, I suppose, that what took me into the whole yoga world and then into coaching in the first place. Just bumping into how much people's physical ailments tended to kind of not necessarily just play into the way their psyche was, but often would be quite indicative of the way their psyche was. So I'd love to explore that with you, and then explore your contribution to the book and how that came about. That will no doubt be fascinating. And then also I'd love to learn a little bit about your journey so far. What brought you to the space that you're currently at. So shall we start
in how many minutes have you got?
So can we start by looking at your findings, your experience of how the emotional stuff, particularly the unresolved emotional stuff, manifests itself as physical pain? Can you sort of share a bit with me about that?
Ooh, gosh, okay. So there's lots and lots of people have written about this, and I don't know if I'm gonna give a coherent answer, but people like Candace Pert, Gabor Mate, Van der Kolk, Bessel van der Kolk, they kind of encapsulated this idea. But I'd say Candace Pert was a scientist, and so what she showed was that our emotions each have a molecular signature, I guess I would say. And the molecules and the receptor sites bind together first, and then you feel that emotion. So she demonstrated that you could change what molecules were going through your brain, basically. She did this in the 80s. She was kind of laughed out of town, but I would say that quite a lot of people's work was then kind of based on that. We also know that your axes in your brain, I mean, I don't know how nerdy you want me to get about this.
Well, I'm fascinated by it, so I'm happy to listen.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, and then you have the Oriental medicine paradigm, and I would say that there's an awful lot of wisdom inherent in that system. And I use that often as a way to explain things that don't quite have an explanation that I don't yet know. Does that make sense? And of course,
you said, an explanation I don't know, because I think that in itself can be something for a lot of people to maybe struggle to admit. Okay, I don't have the answers, particularly when it comes to physical pain. And if someone is a therapist of sorts, to say, actually, I don't have a definite answer for you on this. Yeah, but carry on.
So we also know that if you've been in physical pain for a long time, your structures in your brain change. And so, for example, let's do it the other way around. Trauma, particularly when you're younger, or if you give birth to a prem baby, they become switched on, if you like, for survival. So their amygdala, or your amygdala, becomes hypersensitive to any external information. And we also know that our internal balance system, via quite a polyvagal theory, via the vagus nerve, that gets disturbed also. So you get so much information coming from your environment that you're unable to process.
Okay.
And then your internal balance mechanism gets completely disrupted. And there was a lot of work, and I can't remember, is it Sue Gerhardt? Gerda Gerhardt? And she talks about actually, and there were lots of pieces of research in the, whenever it was, 70s or 80s, about Romanian orphans when they were just neglected and not touched or hugged or soothed, how they did not thrive. Some even died. Some of this has been done on animals. Some of this has also been done on humans. Stop me if I'm kind of waffling on. So
personally, Tracey, personally, I really enjoy this as a subject. I recognize it requires that people pay attention and listen. It doesn't necessarily have the entertainment value, let's say, but for me, there's a lot of insight and learning to come from it, particularly as you say that your early years and that environment that you grow up in can have a very strong impact on the way your brain is then wired.
Absolutely, how it perceives.
When it comes to trauma. Would you be willing to share your definition? Because sometimes I think trauma,
it gets overused.
Well, it's not that it gets overused, but I think sometimes, there is a tendency to say, I mean, people will use words like traumatic to describe traffic at times, or having to wait for something. Sometimes people can exaggerate.
Yeah, or their Amazon package didn't arrive. I hear you.
Yeah. But if you could define trauma, how would you sort of define that as an experience?
Gosh, okay. So if your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs were not met.
Okay.
So either you were physically starved of food or shelter, or clothing or warmth, or if you were emotionally starved of love, attention.
Which will no doubt be quite a lot of people. I think sometimes people don't want to acknowledge their past traumas. And I know a lot of people get really interested in the mindset work that will potentially enable them to reach some kind of level of, I say success, but often it's other people's ideas of success. Whether or not they've defined their own is another matter. But let's come back to what we were saying.
And I also think early childhood, I just want to make one point.
Yeah.
I think if we just, whatever did or didn't happen, okay, if we look at it in the context of when you were a child, you look to your parents as gods and you don't make them wrong. Because if you make the gods that provide for you wrong, then that just messes with your head. So the thing that really does the damage, I feel, I believe, I think, is that you internalize that pain and you make yourself wrong. And for a little person, that really, I'm sorry, I really find it hard to sit on my hands. So for a young person, so then you seek approval when you should just be loved for who you are, and you start to look for approval in the wrong places. Well, you know the whole list. People please. You don't have any boundaries, because boundaries is huge, because perhaps as part of that trauma, your boundaries were repeatedly, you weren't given any, and you didn't have yours respected.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. I recognize it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me, this conversation, to make it really, okay, this is the direction we're heading, because there's so much being shared that I'm like, oh, okay, I want to explore that. I want to explore that. So we might have to do a 24-hour interview at some point, Tracy. Anyway, right.
Listen, I'm not an expert, but I guess through my own personal journey, what I've seen with people and where I'm at in my head, I'd say, and my studies, I guess.
Yeah. So let me share with you, this is my own experience, that as we start getting into the weeds of it a little bit more, we can start to see our own kind of loop, okay? The place in which we haven't learned to meet our own needs enough that we still get caught up in it. Okay, so I recognize my loop. Okay, I've got it quite clear now. And I think that's always the first step, to kind of recognize your experience loops before you can move out of it. So for me, I recognize my childhood experience gave rise to looking out for who do I need to be in order to be loved, or at least to not get punished. Okay, so that was the sort of childhood experience that I remember operating within that a lot. Okay, and then that would then, if there was any feedback that gave me some kind of sense that in some way I'm not, that would then move into the next stage, which was there's something wrong with me. And that would be the circle. Okay, who do I need to be loved? Any feedback that in some way I'm not, something's wrong with me, back again. So it's just this constant loop. And it took me a long time to realize that was the loop that I was caught in. Prior to the recognition of that loop, I just had adaptations to not acknowledge it almost. And I'm sure you can recognize.
I can definitely relate to that. Absolutely, I can relate to that. I had lots of adventures, which, you know, they all make me who I am. And that's okay with me. It's all part of the richness of where I come from, because with all of that said, who you need to become, and as a young person or a small person, you become hyper vigilant. You can literally, I used an expression of being able to sense the molecules change in the room. And so whilst also that had its seeds in trauma, it also gave me an incredible gift at the same time. Does that make sense?
100%. There's always
the terrible gift.
There's a benefit, isn't there? There's always a benefit, even in what can feel like a burden or a wound. It usually serves quite, like a hypersensitivity does lend itself to being just a little bit more aware of people's tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, things that could signify their suffering.
Or their energetic patterns. What's actually, you know, you can actually, you know, I'm sure you're aware that everything about us is energetic. So that's a whole nother level with which to pick up. You sit very straight, and I've got my head to one side. I'm moving about.
Is there anything wrong with that?
No. I feel
just
quite
observation. Okay,
I feel quite fidgety by.
I try and.
You're very still and calm.
I try and stay as still as I can when I'm listening to someone in one of these interviews. You will notice I do have a little bit of a tendency to swivel a bit in my chair. I haven't quite got rid of that one. But then I've also come to a point where I don't really need to. It's all right to. A dog wags its tail a speed according to its level of excitement, doesn't it? I'm like, okay,
I
I'm
guess
quite
I'm
chilled out.
quite an excitable person, really,
Yeah,
which is a good thing. I don't mind that at all.
yeah, yeah. And I think what you've shared there, all of it's okay. One of the prime drives, in my experience, for people's sort of working on themselves is often coming from a sense of they're not okay in some way. And until we pull ourselves out of that space, my experience is it's just an endless search. And it's a profitable industry because of that endless search, in my opinion.
Also, I mean, it takes huge courage to acknowledge that things aren't working and that you're going to take responsibility, because we do live in a world where it is quite easy to keep a profitable set of industries, actually, not just one, where people are always looking outside of themselves for an answer, because it is so painful to take the lid off, or the perception is that it's better to keep that down and hidden. And I think I must have been in my early mid-20s, so probably before you were born, reading that there was nothing inside of me that could hurt me. That shadow wasn't bigger than me. And I think once I really kind of connected with that idea, then I could lift the lid off, if you like, the Pandora's box. But the relief in doing that, I think people who are still, like you say, in that denial or keeping the loop going, you know, the perception, or you really believe that all of that stuff is just gonna derail you completely. But I think what I learnt is that was my step to freedom. That was my commitment to myself. And once I did that, there was no going back, for number one. And number two, actually, I was so much more powerful than all the stuff that I had shoved down. But it's been a long process. I'm 55 and, you know, I'm still slaying those, whatever you want to call them.
I like to use the term experience and adaptations. Okay. So what I mean by experience is, you know, what it was you experienced in those formative years, and then the adaptations you made in order to try and avoid that experience.
Okay, yeah, that makes great sense.
So are you willing to share a little bit about, you know, what some of your experience that led you to this sort of search, let's say?
So both of my parents, so I'm a first generation of immigrants. That's such a freaking horrible term. So I was given the name Tracy so that I could integrate. My father's from the West Indies and my mother is Burmese. So just boundaries, massive. I've realised, and it only took me last year, and I know labels aren't helpful, but my mother is so traumatised and damaged that she was very abusive. No, you know, everything was about her. She was 20 and she had 3 of us and she just couldn't cope. My father, I believe, was sexually abused when he was younger. And so that led to him to sexually abuse his daughters.
Okay. So you must have carried that around for a long time, I imagine, because you just took a big exhale.
I did have to. Yeah, I haven't. I've done a lot of forgiveness and letting go and all of those things. And so in a way, it's just part of my past. But suddenly you asked me, and I slightly wasn't prepared. And if this isn't about blame, it clearly still has some energy left in there. I had to do a lot of kind of healing around shame. It's not my shame. It's not anything I did or didn't do. I think I was one of the luckier ones that my sister and I took him to court because we discovered that he remarried and he abused his stepdaughters also, and then he became a bus driver, and he was also caught on the buses, if you like.
Wow.
So I decided that I went to see him in my 20s. And I just said, look, we've got to talk about this. I hadn't seen him since my parents split up when I was about 10 or 11. And I said, look, we need to sort this out. Can we sort it out? And he just couldn't acknowledge what had happened, what he'd done. He couldn't go there with his pain, which is so sad.
But it's a powerful lesson. Well, for me, I think there's a powerful lesson for all of us in recognizing that we may want others to acknowledge what has happened, but sometimes they're not ready, and they may never be ready.
No.
But that can be sort of a permission slip to say, okay, I can only address my part.
Absolutely. But I mean, the thing that I think people find it hard to get their head around, and even I do sometimes, he was such a great dad. Also, so the two things just sit together, and it can be a bit odd. And there's a little girl in me that still wants her dad. I want him to teach me how to do DIY and fix my bike and stuff like that. And there's a part of me that yearns for that, actually. Which I only really just realised as my voice cracked a bit and as my eyes got a bit watery, just as well I'm blurred. Anyhow.
No, I recognise what you say there. I think I remember when we were on a workshop together in the past that, and I don't think people like to admit this, particularly not publicly anyway, but within every woman is a little girl wanting to be fathered at times.
Oh, God, yeah.
And within every man is a little boy wanting to be mothered at times. We all need that, those periods where we're just held, reassured, comforted, or encouraged, inspired. We all need to have that brought into our experience at times. And if it appears that we don't experience that much as we're growing up, it can be hard for us to access it ourselves. In fact, it can almost be hard for us to even receive it, in my experience. Like, I've spent years pushing away anyone who showed me love, really. It's like I just couldn't trust it, didn't believe it. And when I started to actually allow myself to experience it, it was fucking hard. It was like I had this mirror pushed up in front of me, just showing me what I felt I deserved, and that was quite challenging to sort of challenge that. Because as much as our views, opinions, and beliefs can create a lot of suffering for us, I think in our heads we can have this notion and idea that is safer than the potential unknown of what exists outside of that.
That's really, really well put.
Thank you. Sometimes I get feedback that I overcomplicate things, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I do have to concentrate, but I think awareness, knowledge, all of those things, I kind of describe it, and I describe it to people that are willing to do that with me, or with some of my help, that it really is the journey back to self, and that it's the journey to find yourself and connect with who you are, and source,
Yeah.
whatever that means for you. And I think sometimes as humans, we do make it a bit overcomplicated. And I do think that we get so stuck in our humanness and our behaviors, and add to that society. So when I grew up, for example, life was quite simple in some ways, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. I do think, like, so for example, I love technology. I do love it because it is amazing. We're having these conversations, and thankfully, throughout lockdown, there was still that opportunity to connect with people. I learn from people who live the other side of the world, but also it's another set of inputs which we're not really designed to be processing all the time.
There's a lot to take in for sure, isn't there, in
Oh
modern
yeah,
day?
okay. So I just made that sound a lot more complicated. I played outside. I played on the street. I called for my neighbours.
Yeah.
There wasn't. You knew there was a boogeyman that lived up the road. There was.
You said boogeyman just as I itched my nose.
It's your guilty pleasure, was it?
Okay, so you shared your experience, which thank you for that. By the way, I have no doubt it's not an easy thing to do in a public forum, let's say. So thank you for that. Will you share your kind of adaptations to that experience?
Sure. So I would say I had absolutely no concept that my beingness or my existence had anything, like I had wants or needs, or there was like a whole part of me that was, I wouldn't empty, because I didn't feel empty. I have had an amazing life, but I've had a lot of crazy adventures, I could say. Traveling. I thought I existed to please other people. There was no concept that if I was hungry, I should eat or ask for food, or that I had emotional needs, physical needs, emotional needs, any needs, actually. How I even operated, I have no idea. I guess I discovered when I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, that I could be quite funny. I could do accents. And so that became a thing. And then I got older. I quite liked studying. I could get my head down, and I remember very consciously making the connection between freedom, having two things, having an education and having a passport was a real thing for me. So using those as vehicles. So getting lost in my head, taking risks that were actually, if my 20-year-old daughter did some of the things I did, I'd just be freaking mortified, quite frankly.
What did you do? Are you willing to share? But I think you had. I've been quite open about my. I had quite a long period where I was I dependent? Probably was dependent on drugs, to be honest. And it wasn't a dependency. No, it was basically as a way of managing aspects of my experience that I just didn't know how to be okay with. And so it just served as a form of kind of distraction and avoidance, really. But at the time, it was painted as fun, and it meant I dressed and looked a certain way, and that then you're wearing your colours and you're waving your flag to your tribe, and that tribe are into the same things. And once I started to put a lot of those things down, it did change a lot, just in terms of how I communicated, how I dressed, how I even part of me how it wanted to be seen. Like a lot of that stuff fell away. It was quite interesting actually. Anyway, so yeah, go back to.
So I think I was just completely numb. I'd shut down. So in order to feel anything at
Yeah.
all, I took ridiculous risks,
Okay.
physical risks, emotional risks, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Yeah.
Would you say chasing experiences?
Chasing experiences and going, oh gosh, this is what it's like to feel some kind of something, a connection or not, or just feeling, and just wild stupidness, really. What can I mean, do I need to be more specific than that? I think people can
No,
use
I'm
their
sure people can.
imagination.
Yeah.
Unhealthy, toxic relationships, abusive relationships, like really controlling relationships. Yeah, I think I was, on one hand, it was like the tale of two halves. On one hand, I could be very kind of extrovert and out there, but another part of me was very kind of alone, if you like, or just trailing, doing my own ploughing in my own field. I got bullied quite a lot within my profession because I didn't have any boundaries. Boundaries, definitely.
Can you define a boundary? For me, I think it's because I hear the word boundaries. It's important to have a boundary. I hear that kind of stuff fairly frequently, but I rarely hear someone define what it is concisely.
What it is. Okay, so I guess I thought, I had this kind of faulty thinking pattern where everybody's trustworthy and they're the same as me. So they're not going to be physically aggressive or take advantage of my good nature. I didn't know how to pick those red flags up. My own mother would starve me and beat me, and I would need stitches, but I didn't get the stitches. So, and then my father would cross my boundaries by raping me. I'm going to say it. So I absolutely had no freaking.
Just give me a moment. That was I felt like a rush of like fucking hell. Okay, carry on.
It is quite heavy. I'm sorry. I just think sometimes I have to just say it, and I forget that I've dealt with it. And so for other people, it's like, whoa. Where were we? Boundaries. So yeah, I had mine so messed up.
Yeah.
But I'm still here. In a way, I still love people. I love meeting them. I try to be kind. I suppose it could have gone horribly the other way, and I don't know, maybe I'm an asshole, but I try to treat my fellow human as I would like to be treated. I think that's with boundaries, of course.
Yeah. And what a testament to what's possible for someone, even after going through trauma to that degree, that they can still be willing to trust and give and not just become bitter and resentful and angry at the world. I think it's very inspiring. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you. I've had my moments. Look, I'm human.
Sure. Yeah, you're
I think I guess I think how I've done it, or I turned it in. I'm so broken. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be? So, or not being able to receive. I am very comfortable in giving or doing the doing. And I think, so for example, my husband, it's not been I don't think it's been an easy ride for him at all. I don't think any relationship is at all anyway, because you're going to rub each other and mirror, but he also doesn't have the emotional language. So he just takes things at face value, which is a huge strength, but it also can cause problems. But,
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
is.
I always think that our intimate relationship tends to give us insight into the deeper stuff. Because often, I know lots of people in the coaching space and sharing the difficulties that they experience in relationship is not something that, in my opinion, that many people do. Because there is a lot of emphasis on trying to keep up appearances, isn't there? And the other thing is, in my experience, when we speak about anything that is a challenge or a difficulty for us, quite often people go into a mode of, because they're not comfortable with those emotions that start to come up in those conversations, they're looking to kind of just bypass it as quickly as possible. Sort of, there, it'll be okay, or that won't necessarily give you the space to actually communicate what's going on.
Absolutely. And I remember being a new grad and being very moved by, that was 19, 20, 21. And in some ways I was so sophisticated emotionally. And in other ways I was so childlike. So I could really hold emotionally a grown man who's had heart surgery and he's terrified and all of those things. And I remember saying, it's okay. I don't think you're a baby. Just let it go, let it be. You're safe.
Yeah, it's so powerful what you've shared there. And you used the word safe. Okay, honestly, it's a bold statement. It's a bold statement. But I would assert that so much of what people are chasing is an attempt to cover up an internal sense of not being safe in some way. So the more I can have of this, pick whatever it is you want.
Totally.
The less I'm ever going to have to bump into that sense of not being safe. That existential sense of I'm not safe in the world in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not safe. I'm broken. Yeah, the escapism. And of course I think that's what I alluded to when I said it was pretty simple when I was growing up.
Yeah.
I think life has got more complicated because there's more shiny baubles. So you can actually go through your whole life having never really connected to what it is that you want and who you are, and make those mistakes, if you like, or have those adventures in an effort. I just promised myself when I was a kid, I know it's quite an intense thing to promise, but I just promised myself that I would live, I would try and be alive, and I would try and I would do my best to make my life something, if that. I didn't define what something was, but that I would feel and experience and use my brain and make mistakes. And I looked, and I think, did I write this in my chapter? No, because I trashed that chapter because it was just too personal. But I wasn't ready to kind of like the world to read it, but I definitely lost my train. But I definitely it went. Sorry.
It's all right. Okay, so one thing I would really be fascinated. There's so much we can dig into, isn't there? Let's try and keep it as succinct as we can.
Oh God, you picked the wrong person to chat to then. Jeez.
All right, so if trauma is unresolved, which I would say for a huge portion of people is not even looked at, I would say that often a lot of work is done as a compensation to actually addressing it. Like you said, often we're we're chasing things that we've been told will fulfill us. And there's lots of industries that really know how to play into the inherent sense of lack that we have, which has then got that stuff layered on top of it. However, if trauma is left unresolved, unaddressed, from your perspective in the physiotherapy space, how many? Oh God, there must be so many. In fact, all right, let's ask it in a different way. I'll ask the question in a different way. Can you sort of name a few sort of like emotional issues that you see specifically linked to physical issues? Like, for example, I know that people who have back pain for a long period of time often suffer with depression, because just that sort of debilitating pain for an extended period of time. And then sometimes the back pain gets worse when they're stressed and things like that. So
it will always, because physiologically.
Yeah.
Oof. Okay. So so classically fibromyalgia. That's kind of.
I'm so pleased you said that. Yeah.
So I remember 25 years ago when it sort of came into being.
Because it used to be misdiagnosed as ME, didn't it? Fibromyalgia, yeah.
And now it is classified as a neurological problem. And what we find is that the brain itself, so your kind of thinking cognitive part, the part of your brain that processes external stimuli, so your limbic system, and makes sense of it, that all basically becomes overloaded and overstimulated, and the brain actually kind of maladapts, and it thinks that there is, if you like, not thinks consciously, but it perceives physiologically that there's threats that aren't there. And I remember
starts to become hardwired for
absolutely
the expectation of future trauma almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And 99%, well, at least, well, I'd say, I'm going to throw some wild statistics and I'm not sure if they're correct, so forgive me. So at least 2/3 are women. At least 90% of those 2/3 have suffered some kind of emotional or physical trauma. So they were brought up with an abusive parent, or they were prem, or they were adopted, and they never experienced being wanted, for want of a. And so I was reading some papers, and actually children who've suffered from sexual abuse, they undergo a process in their brain synapses. I'm getting a bit techie here.
No, I like it.
That it's called methylation. Okay. Or some people call it phosphor. Anyway, and that's a long-term change in receptor sites, which causes depression. Okay. And I kind of instinctively knew that, but I do like a bit of, science to back those things up.
Okay. Can a similar response occur as a result of other forms of just, let's not use the word abuse, just mental or emotional suffering?
Yes. So if someone's pain, literally, we know now that chronic pain is actually because the nervous system has become hardwired, but it's also a process of being overloaded. Yeah. And I think also it's wrapped up with other stuff. Like, so some people, so I had a 20-stone woman land on me and my back was a bit knackered, but I didn't think more about it than that. I was, in a way, the other extreme. I almost ignored the fact that I had a shattered disc. And I kind of...
Which disc was it, sorry?
L5S1, classic.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, concertina, I was, I'm 5'2" at my tallest. I'm now about 5'1.5", but I'm sure that's because I've lost disc height. But I didn't I just, as a physio, I was really good, and I did all the things that I was supposed to do, and I did all the pain management, and I did this and I did that. And then when I hadn't dealt with all the other stuff, I could have so easily fallen into the chronic pain pattern. But I always consider myself lucky that, one, I went through that pain, so I could really connect with my patients. I understood their worries, their fears. I think people can catastrophize and make it mean more than it means. People feel very afraid if their physical body hurts and lets them down.
Yeah, for sure.
It's layered and it's complicated, but it's the 21st century problem, chronic pain, and how it changes. Yeah, people become depressed. Their whole, the way the pituitary, hypothalamus, adrenals, that axis, it completely shifts and misaligns, to put it in sort of non-science terms, and people's perception of what's going on changes. Their perception physically, their perception emotionally. It's big, it's serious stuff. The fear, basically, their limbic system says, whoa, you're in danger. You're in danger. And they literally, some science showed, do shut me up in a minute because I can hear myself going on and on. So there was quite a lot, there's been a lot of work around this, that if you show people pictures of that part of the body that was injured, or the place where that car accident happened, that maybe they lost somebody in that accident, literally the brain acts as if the trauma just started again. The physical trauma, the physiology, the limbic system, everything. So I think we're beginning to and also I think West medicine does something fatal, which it separates the mind from the body. And
We're onto a big
nervous
subject here, aren't we?
system, the nervous system is the mind, and it is the body. So I think I threw that out years and years ago. And I was driving home tonight behind this lovely little learner. Thank God I live in the Cotswolds and I'm not in London anymore, because that would have got me a little bit agitated. I was just looking at the trees and the sky and just like, oh God, this is great. I'll just slow down and breathe. I lost my thought again.
That's okay. I've got a question for you from Ornella. She has asked, can one live...
Shit, am I live? Sorry, Ornella.
Can one live through depression quite normally?
What do you mean?
I would answer that, because I would say that...
What does she mean by that? Can you live through it normally?
Well, I think, it's...
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, because I think everybody's normal becomes normal for them, doesn't it? So someone that experiences depression, that becomes their norm, and it can be difficult to even explore that it's possible to not operate from within that space anymore. Okay, so I would like to explore with you, Tracy, possibility. Okay, what's possible? Okay, because if we peel back the lid and we fully actually acknowledge what we have going on, rather than looking to avoid it or cover it up or do things so we don't have to experience it, if we lift the lid and see, oh, okay, I've got this stuff going on, I can feel it in my body, I can feel it internally as the emotions, I notice it as patterns of thinking. How much can be done, and then how much is so hardwired that we have to learn how to just live with it in a different way? Because I tend to err more towards possibility, but I know some people will argue for, no, that's how it is now.
Well, I guess in my experience, yeah, I'm afraid I'm for the possibility.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Neuroplasticity, or the ability to change your connections in your brain, so the
Okay.
receptors and the synapses, they got you there, and you can absolutely untangle it. Absolutely, you can untangle it. I think now is probably more exciting than ever because there are so many tools out there. And I guess, there are different levels and different dimensions of or different facets, I think, of the problem. And I would say that food is important. It literally can change the way you process emotions, your biochemical changes. I'd say being able to you can change how you feel by, well, you teach yoga. Breath work is probably one of the most powerful tools.
I think it's one of the most direct. I find it super helpful because one of the things I've noticed, and I say this with clients, is you can develop a level of awareness that means you notice the thought process, you notice the emotion, but that stuff still arises. It's just what happens. Mind does its thing. The body does its thing. We experience the full spectrum of the human experience, but there's lots that we can do so that our relationship with it enables it to move with a lot more ease, as opposed to, I don't want to feel this, and then creating further layers of tension and tightness. We can learn how to be in a relationship with all of our experience, which is one that's a little bit more supportive and open, as opposed to, just trying to keep walls and block certain experiences, only have others.
And I think love changes everything.
That's
Love,
a song, isn't it?
yeah, it is. Sorry.
Who sings that?
I have no idea. Really, the literal breathing and literally thinking about your heart changes your biochemistry, your neurophysiology. I find it fascinating that all kind of ancient wisdom and knowledge and paradigms of Oriental medicine, we're starting to really understand the power of it and what it really does to your physiology.
Okay. So one thing I would say, so Ornella's been quite open here. She says that alcoholic can function, a drug user can function. What is the definition of depression? My father was a functioning alcoholic and successful general foreman in construction. Yeah, so I mean, that's an interesting point, because I've met people who are incredibly successful in terms of financially, materially, but in terms of their internal experience, the degree in which they're able to experience intimacy in relationships, the degree in which they're able to connect with other people, that's something that they've never learned how to, really move into.
And maybe they just never want to. So I guess
that's another question.
Here's the thing. You do get to decide.
Yeah.
You get to decide whichever way you want to do it. And if I know plenty of people that go, I'm not going there. I'm never going to go there. I hear you. I feel you. I'd love to. You're living proof, but no, thank you.
Yeah. And I would simplify it right down to say that it's nothing more than learning to be okay with some emotions you've chosen to try and not experience anymore. It could be simplified to that for me.
Yeah, or or you're looking at life in 2D when it could be 3D.
Yes. which also,
Or
I
your
always think this is where the physical part is so very important as well, in that your nervous system's ability to process information is based a lot on, you know, your ability to move. You know, if you start to become stiff and tight and your postural patterns start to close you in, you
your
start
fascia,
to
your
disengage from a
fascia
lot of feedback.
literally
Yeah.
ties you down.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of work around fascia and how it holds onto the memories. So even if you don't want to go there in here or in your heart, your body will hang on to it. So, you know, maybe you don't have to experience every single bit of hurt. And maybe there are other ways you can let it go and acknowledge it.
But that's the salient point for me, that it is that growing, that expansion that so many of us are pursuing. It is limited only by the degree that you're prepared to let go. And that letting go, in my experience, it's just the changing of your relationship with what it is, you know. That's my experience anyway. It's
Or
not,
if you change your relationship with yourself, then you I know it's semantics, but you will automatically change your. So instead of always focusing on the trauma, just focus on healthy ways to relate to yourself through food, through movement, through gratitude.
Yeah.
And then you can work backwards.
Would you say that comes after? For me, I think that taking the lid off, acknowledging what has happened, and then reconciling that, and then the steps to, you know, not keep getting dragged back to it. Because I have experienced people keep getting dragged back to the same stuff until it's fully reconciled.
I'm not an
bungee cord effect.
But at all I know is that for me, taking the lid off was infinitely better than not taking the lid off.
It takes a lot of effort to keep it on, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes a lot of effort to keep pushing things down. Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of things I want to clarify, because I know we kind of segued like that.
That's how my brain works, or doesn't, I didn't know what to expect or what you would ask me.
Neither did I, which is how I kind of like it for these conversations.
So everything is completely unedited. I mean, you may have noticed my eyes got wet. I was crying just as well as I'm blurred, but could have got ugly and snotty, but it didn't.
Listen, so we covered establishing a boundary, but we never really quite defined it. So I'm going to give my definition. A great friend of mine taught me about the 7 words, and how there's usually a struggle with 1 or 2 of them for all of us. So for me, the establishing of a boundary is the energy of no. Simple as that. Just saying, no, not for me.
Okay.
How would you describe it?
Look, that's nice. I don't have a definition. I just don't have a definition. I'm not really. I don't know what to say. There's no right answer really, but yes, it kind of makes sense. Being okay. Oh, I know. I was listening to a podcast and they said it's about respectfully being able to state your preferences. Without having to, in a respectful way, without having to explain.
Nice,
there was a bit more to it, but you know, I'm 55. A bit fell out of my brain. Actually, 55 is nothing, but menopause does mess with your brain. But anyway, you know about that.
Okay, cool. The other bit I wanted to just dig into briefly with you is, you mentioned about kind of older traditions. So whether we're looking at things like Chinese medicine, TCM, or maybe Ayurvedic medicine, or different modalities, right? And I think these are really, really useful to give, because they look more at the interconnectivity of mind, body, emotion, and how it's all going on. One thing I do think the Western world has really brought into the equation is language, the actual talking components of it. Because I always think that where the rubber meets the road is very much in relationships with one another. That's where everything that we're not aware of is sort of mirrored back to us, revealed to us. And one of the most direct ways of addressing that is through how we communicate. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Communication is everything. Communication is everything, verbal, non-verbal. It's what it's how we connect, human to human.
Yeah.
It's kind of at the center of everything. And I guess we all want to be understood. That's what we all yearn for, don't we? To be understood. And to be safe and to be loved. And so communication is, I think, maybe the linchpin that brings that together.
And it's not an easy thing. In my experience, to express your experience to another through the medium of words, it's no easy task, because there's so many little language patterns that we can all fall into, that depersonalize, that blame, and before we know it, we're having a conversation where we're not speaking about our experience. We're kind of just batting analogies, theories, and stories back and forth, and not really connecting at all. So,
yeah, I guess it's about actively engaging, actively listening, actively being present, allowing. So I think you're exceptional at that, I would say, compared to, I've been a medical practitioner, and I think we can be a bit rush in because we want to give the answers. I'm probably a bit like that too. And just, it's that allowing, but prompting, supporting. I think it's dynamic too. And it depends. It really depends on the person and their experiences. So, for example, I would say that my family, we're very noisy, we're very chatty. I come from a big family. Big relative, there's 5 siblings, from 3 different marriages, but we all get on really, really well. It's very loud, very noisy. There are lots of grown-ups, lots of children, lots of in-betweeners, lots of food. And there's, I guess, people want to know about you, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And we're pretty tactile bunch. I think we've definitely, I would say, my siblings and I and our families have really changed the culture, if you like, of how we grew up. So when I say change the culture, I don't mean in the traditional way that we look at culture, as in, we don't have bindis or none of us wear saris. I don't mean that. I mean the culture in as much as language, expectations, communication, active listening, that kind of culture. Feelings that you matter, the allowing of discussing things openly, even if it's difficult. So I really see that in my mother. So it was very, very recently. I'll give you an example before I get too abstract. So my daughter's nearly 20, my eldest. So yeah, I was a late bloomer, late developer, always wrote it on my report cards, makes me laugh. But it was only really recently, maybe 2 years ago, that her experience of me because you use that a lot, and I just couldn't get my head around it until fairly recently. Her experience of me when she was a teenager and my experience of her, and what they can be two different things. I was very much brought up, I'm right, therefore you are wrong. There is only one right and one wrong. And it was so recent, a couple of years into my 50s, it was like, wow, yeah, we can both have, or it kind of could chunk to deeper layers. I probably did understand it, but it really hit home because that's my birth daughter. I grew her, I nourished her. You know what that's like. Well, not entirely, but yes.
That is an experience that will always be denied.
Just her realizing that we can both have had an experience, but experience it differently.
Yeah.
And I allowed her to have her experience of me, which was very unflattering and very painful. And equally, I had my experience of her. And now, you know, she sends me, she's moved, she trains dogs in Northampton.
Wow.
German Shepherds. She's an outdoor country girl. She's so happy.
My favourite dog.
She's shining brightly, and I'm so grateful for that, because we could mirror each other and listen and learn. And you'll get that when your daughter's older, and it's such a privilege to connect and listen.
Yeah.
And
I was singing to her last night, Tracy. Nothing particularly fancy, just the ABC, and I made up a little song with her name in it. And
what's her name? Sorry,
her name's Eleanor.
Eleanor. Okay.
Yeah, Eleanor.
I just and also I would say that having my daughter, both daughters, has been a huge opportunity for healing.
Do you know, it's funny you should say that. I know I might be interjecting a little bit here.
No. God, I'd waffle on until bloody midnight. You carry on.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up shortly. This is something that I bumped into when we first brought Eleanor home, right? One of the things that I've had to digest, and it's kind of invited me into a deeper level of healing and acceptance, let's use that terminology, is another level of love. Now, me and Nazgul both agreed, and I don't know if people will disagree with me here, and I'm not too fussed. It wasn't a love that we hadn't felt before. It's just the speed that it arrived. That's how I would describe it. Like we both said that no, we feel love towards each other like this. It's just for her it was instant. There wasn't a checklist of like she has to have this before I will let myself feel that towards her. It was just instant. That was the only sort of major difference. But what experiencing that level of love gave rise to was an awareness of, and here we come full circle to my own loop again, my own fear of loss. Yeah. Because that will then feed into, okay, what's wrong with me? Who do I have to be? Yeah.
Loss. Yeah, it's interesting that you use that word loss.
Yes. And I recognize that we never really own something or someone. We experience it for, we could say, a gifted period of time.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Putting it. But yeah, I suppose on some level, although I recognize that from a conceptual perspective, it isn't quite fully integrated. So there is still a fear of losing that which I haven't acknowledged is already coming from me in the first place. There's still a little bit of a gap there.
Gosh, yes, that's intense. I guess, yeah, look, playfulness and just light heart and just like the joy of my daughters, as I remember every time, every month, every milestone, I go, oh, this is amazing. And I have not stopped saying that. And she'll be 20 in about 4 months. I have not stopped saying, wow, you blow me away. You're just being. And I, that also touched some sadness, like, wow, I don't get it. All I feel is just joy and love for this human, who also reflected back to me parts of me that I were unhealed, shall we say, or, it, of course, it rubs you, and it's an opportunity. It's always an opportunity, this discomfort.
Yeah.
I would say.
I'd agree with you there that, when we start to lean into or touch upon those spaces and places of discomfort, we're always being invited to integrate an aspect of ourselves that, as of yet, we haven't learned to just hold, let's say.
And just, it's a huge privilege to help shape, but also now we've always talked. My husband always says, honestly, you two, sometimes I can't come in because you two are just so into each other. Not obviously in a set, but just you're so reading it and finishing each other's sentences and just like laughing at the same thing, or just it's wonderful. It's
so there's a really good rapport there.
Has always been, but it she had to reject me in order to leave, and so that was bloody painful. But then I realized,
though, isn't it, because if a child doesn't reach the stage of rejecting their parents, they're never going to go out and
grow up
their own lives. So.
Totally. That is so important. I remember crying in Primark because she was 11 and she looked like she was 16 and she wanted to wear a bikini. So I was like, I'm not sure that's a great idea, honey. Okay, well, put it on and see what your dad says. See if he thinks. And she was like, I'm not letting him look. And I'm like, darling, okay, I didn't want to have to talk about this, but hey, the opportunity's presented itself, sweetheart, you want to go swimming, that darn thing's going to fall off you as soon as you get in the water. If you want to swim, wear a swimming costume. And we just had to talk about recognizing that her shape has changed, and the opposite sex and the same sex will perhaps perceive her differently. And the pair of us were bawling. And she was like, I hate you, but I love you so much. And, and I was like, God, I didn't know how to have this conversation. Forgive me. My job is to keep you safe. Same when she was going to a party. You can phone me if you like. I'm like, darling, my job is to keep you safe and protect you so you can have a wonderful life. I need the phone number of an adult that's going to be there. That's all I'm asking for. Not because I'm nosy and I want to, and she got it. And then every time she went, she'd just go, look, that's so-and-so's mum or so-and-so's dad. But mostly I didn't intervene. I just let her throw shit at me, which was quite awkward. Anyway.
Did any of it stick?
No, I don't. No. I had my moments. I had my moments when I think, I was a bit of a toxic, blaming sort of, but I kept it. I didn't direct it at her. I'd swear or roll a cigarette and have a glass of wine outside and wait till she'd gone and just be effing and jeffing just to get it off my chest. I'm human. I'm absolutely human in all my glorious flaws, warts and everything. And I've learnt that that's okay. And for anyone who's struggling, just when you embrace and hold, I think, those parts of you that you think are unlovable or that are unhealed, just hold them. And you have the power within yourself to break that and just heal it.
Yeah. And others will always invite us to see those parts and to do that as well. Yeah. Listen, Tracey, I've really enjoyed chatting to you. I love this format, completely unplanned. Just see what comes up, where it goes. It's been wonderful. I've shared with you the kind of the loop that I recognize is still there for me. What would you say is your, because I think we clear up certain stuff, don't we? And then we start to touch on the things that are more deeper, that are more, I would say, universal. You know, like the sense of being human carries with it a sense of being separate to everything else. You know, here's me, everything else is outside of that. You know, and dealing with that stuff can be a little bit more intense in my experience, anyway. So, what would you say are, you know, your sort of sticking points that you still bump into?
I guess it's that one big, distill it down to not being enough.
Yeah, not enough in some way.
Not enough.
And then, have you got evidence
Patterns.
to support that being sustained as well?
It can. I think it can come up in so many forms.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a really tough one to answer. It comes up in my business. I mean, 5 years ago, I opened a clinic, and I remember going, "Oh my God," because I was NHS trained. I never thought I would leave the NHS, but I only left the NHS. Ironically, anyway, I won't go there. I left because the way I wanted to be with people and the way it was going, it just wasn't meeting anywhere near the middle. So I kind of left. But I remember thinking, oh my God, who's going to pay me money to hear what I have to say? That really, I had a panic moment. And I get that kind of rises because, you know, you put yourself out there, don't you? If I had a job, I could probably hide. So, but I realized the more I own what I'm saying and how I'm doing things, I can only be truthful to me, and that's all that really matters.
Nice. Listen, Tracey,
I probably didn't answer your question.
That's all right. Who says that you have to, huh?
Your questions are so hard to answer. They're so big, and yet they're so nebulous.
Right.
There's a word for you.
Yeah, good word. Good word. Maybe I shouldn't ask myself these questions.
I think one can get really caught in the head game.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. 100%.
And I think that can really mess with you.
Yeah.
Not anybody.
Yeah. I think there's a movement inwards for a certain amount of time before the recognition arises that there's nowhere else to go. You just have to ask yourself, who is it that's doing that? And I think that lends itself to a whole other area of.
What do you mean, who? Is it important? Who?
That's what I mean. Is it important? That's the bit that I'm getting at. Is it important? You know, because we touch on that thing. There's a sense of a me there, and like a lot of like Zen Buddhist practices, who am I? You know, or you know, in affirmations, people use things like "I am." We could go the other way and say for an am there has to be an I in the first place? Point that out to me. You know, it depends how far you want to go with this stuff. So
God,
I think we can find, you know, the Advaita Vedanta path, which is a non-dual form of yoga philosophy, is trying to just reveal to you that the root of your suffering is the sense that there is a me there that is doing it. Can you actually pinpoint where that me is? The body is a constantly changing process. The mind is a constantly changing process. Where's the central bit that you could say is the me? Now, some people would give ideas and concepts of soul and things like that. And, you know, maybe nice idea, who knows? But we start to move into a space that is, maybe it becomes too philosophical. I don't know. However, now I'm complicating things.
talk about getting lost in your own.
Yeah, I agree. It depends where you want to go with it, doesn't it? It depends where you want to go with it. My studies in Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, it's not about the who am I. It's looking at, well, is there an I in the first place? And that is, I think, quite an interesting area to explore, because that root of being an I, if that's not there, the suffering could no longer have a place to land in the first place, you know?
Yeah, because I is a separation, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So
all
that's
about
where these philosophies start to steer towards. However, they don't give something to nourish the human part that wants to go out and explore and achieve and accomplish. So it's sort of, how do we bring those two together?
Sure. But I mean, another way of looking at that is, so your world, or what's going on in your world, is a reflection energetically and whatever other word of who you are at that given moment in time, and that you create things before you bring them in the physical world. You create them with your thoughts and your emotions.
That's based on the presupposition that they're your thoughts and emotions, which is based on the presupposition of the I that does that. You know, so then it depends where you want to go with it. I personally like the conversations on that side. However, I recognize they get a bit like, my head's getting a bit.
Yeah. You can kind of drive yourself bonkers with the whole getting very theoretical, and then it gets a bit, I don't know.
And it doesn't necessarily help the individual either.
No. And then I think it just feeds straight into kind of ego and being able to dissect abstract concepts.
Yeah.
And kind of, you know, fence with them just for the sake of it. But
yeah, I know what you mean. I think that
perhaps I'm just not intellectual enough and it doesn't interest me at all.
I don't think it's that. I think it's more that people identify more with a certain aspect than others. So some are more physical in nature, some it's going to be more intellect, some it's going to be more emotive. And so I think we have a preferred route, preferred modality that we tend to explore more. And then we'll have other areas that we explore maybe not so much. So the Advaita Vedanta path is just one that I've just been very interested in for a long time. And so I can talk about that, and it starts to become a bit confusing, but I get it. Makes sense to me, you know. However, if someone was to go much more into maybe the emotive space and start using words like soul and talking about crystals and stuff, I would probably switch off, if I'm honest, you know. So everybody has that. There's a degree of preference, at the same time trying to remain open to what is outside of that.
On that note, there's nothing more to say, really, is there?
Tracy, it's been wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. I hope your listeners, viewers, it was helpful in some way, or interesting, or sparks debate. or whatever you want it to do. I don't know.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me. We didn't talk about what I wrote in my chapter, but
no, we spoke about pretty much everything. Well, we didn't speak about everything. We had a good chat. Let's just say
we had a really good chat, and we
lovely
shared
to
stuff,
see
and we
you.
got to know
I've
each
run
other.
over by 25 minutes.
Okay.
Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
And bye for now.